We successfully have our many-to-many relationship in place for the medical history of the patient. We're showing the history here on the index, the details, the lead. I'm not going to go through that. Our next task is being able to maintain it and edit and create. Now, in order to do that, what we're going to find, as often in more complex situations, it's helpful to have a view model. What is a view model? Well, we like to organize them and keep them separate from the actual models. So I'm going to right-click and add a new folder to keep my code very well organized. Okay, view models. The idea of a view model is it represents an object, obviously, of some sort, the classes that we put in here, separate and distinct from the ones that are used to actually persist information to the database. So they're usually classes or objects for our convenience to help us group or bundle information together, perhaps for presenting on the screen, or even in addition to that, manipulating collections of information related to it as well, right? Basically, any kind of object that helps us out in getting the work done that is not specifically an entity object persisted to the database. So I'm going to make a little helper object here. I'm going to add a class. I'm going to call the class CheckOption. And I tend to use VM as a short form for view model, right in the name. Okay, my public class CheckOption VM, and it's going to consist of this. Notice I have a comment here, used for a checkbox, right? We'll have an integer for the ID, so we can store that. We'll have a string for the display text, and a Boolean as to whether or not this is assigned. So think about a checkbox. Okay? The display text is whatever label will be displayed beside it. The ID will be the internal value. If I check this off, the value of that particular item or entity, whatever you want to say, okay, is going to be stored in ID. And since we're using integer primary keys everywhere, it makes sense to use an integer to store that value. Boolean, assigned, is it checked or not? Right? So this is nicely set up to represent a checkbox itself. So now we have that. We can come back. I can clean up the screen a little, get some of this off the screen. We're back in the patient controller. Let me go Control MO, shrink everything down. Okay. What we're going to do is we need some additional methods in here, just void methods that we're going to call internally. These will be private ones. So notice we have all the public ones, and then we get down here to the different private ones, right? So I'm going to add it to this section near the bottom of the controller, keeping the private ones out instead of mixing them intermingled in with the various public methods that we have. Now, I don't know if I should get these one at a time. Maybe I will, okay? We basically need to be able to call on two jobs, right? The first job, kind of like we populated select lists for dropdowns, we need to prepare the collection of checkbox view model objects for each condition, okay? We're going to set assigned equals true for conditions already in the patient's medical history, right? So the patient entity with included patient conditions is the object we pass in. So that's the parameter we pass in here, our patient, right? But we have to make sure we've already done the dot include for the patient conditions, right? Okay. So we're going to go and get all the conditions there are. So a simple link query, context, conditions, to list, right? Our assigned condition, we just want the IDs of them. So we're going to create a new hash set of integers based on the link query, patient conditions. Now remember, we've already loaded them in. So we aren't going to the database here. It's just an object query, you might say, right? So we just go to the patient object, go into the patient conditions, and select every condition ID. So that'll be all the ones that are assigned. They're the ones that are already in the medical history of the patient, right? Then we can use linked actually with the dot select to prepare all the condition options, right? So what it's going to do is going to create new check option view model objects, okay? Getting the ID from the condition, the display text from the condition name, and the assigned, okay, is to whether or not our collection here, the assigned condition IDs, contains this particular one. So the to list will give us that nice list, which then we add to where? Of course, we put it in view data, condition options, right? And there we go. So that will prepare so that when we go to the view, if we call this ahead of time, when we go to the view, it will already have this collection in view data for all the checkboxes. Now, before we go on, I'll add the next one here as well. This one is where we're going to actually maintain or update the information about the checkboxes themselves, right? Okay. All right. Updates the patient conditions for a patient to match the selected checkboxes. That's what we're doing here, right? Two parameters, okay? The selected options and the patient to update. So the selected options is IDs of the selected conditions, right? So we just have to make sure we pass that in when we call this update patient conditions method, right? So simple logic here. If no options are selected, clear all the conditions. In other words, if none of the checkboxes are checked, maybe they previously had something checked off, maybe by mistake or whatever, and then now we want to make sure we remove it. The simple way to do that, we check if selected options is null, and we can double check that the length is 0, right? And then in that case, we just set the patient conditions to a new empty collection. That's all. A new empty collection basically wipes out the old collection of patient conditions, and then we just return. Our job is done. It'll look after when we actually save the patient update to the database. That's when it would update all the related records. Okay. Now, we need to go get the selected options, what checkboxes are currently checked, and store that here in selected IDs, right? And that's our collection here. So it's going to be basically a hash set of strings. Now, don't worry, we'll deal with the fact that there's strings later on. Okay. Current condition IDs, right? So we go to the patient update, what is in their medical history right now, and we select all the condition IDs there, storing that in this one. It's a hash set of integers. Okay. Then for each, in all conditions, basically, for each condition in the entire database, we're going to go through and deal with each one, right? So we get the ID, we two-string it for comparison, condition ID string, right? And then we have two Booleans. Is it selected, and is it currently assigned? We determine is it selected by checking the selected IDs and see if it contains it. If it's currently assigned, then we check the current condition IDs and see if it contains this particular condition's ID. Now we know those two key pieces of information, and then we can simply do an if. If it's selected and it's not currently assigned, then we're going to make a new patient condition object, right? So we'll go to the patient update, its patient conditions collection, and add a new patient condition, right? Where the IDs come from the information we have available here. Else, if it's not selected but is currently assigned, right, then we need to remove it. So we go and we initialize the condition to remove, right? And then we just, if it's not equal to null, we call .remove to take that condition out of the collection of the patient to update. By the way, if it doesn't match either of these ifs, it means that it either is selected and currently still should be, or it wasn't selected and should not be. So we don't have to change it, right? These are the only two situations where we need to make a change to the actual data. Okay, so that's all the code to maintain us or help us with our actual maintenance of this information. Now we have to tie that into the actual create and edit processes, right? So let me come up here to the create get, okay? What we need to do, so far we just called populate drop-down lists and return view. We never even created a patient, right? But we need to change that now. We actually have to have a patient object in order to call our populate assigned condition data. So I'm just going to new up a new blank patient, so to speak, because I have to have one, so there'll be no medical history, obviously, because it's a brand new patient, I just created it, but I have to supply a patient to my populate assigned condition data. So this would basically get all the checkboxes, okay, the view model objects for them in my view data to display on the screen. Nothing, of course, will be checked yet because I'm just creating a new patient. Okay, now let's come down here to the actual post for create, right? Just going to put enter here so that we can get things on the screen together. What I need to do is I need to add a parameter. each checkbox in the actual view is going to have a common name. Okay, so all the ones that are checked will be added to an array called selected options. The array takes the same name as each individual one, right? So I need a parameter here, comma. It'll be a string of selected options. And it'll be a comma-separated string of the IDs of all the selected options. Oh, can't put it there. Sorry. I'll put it at the end, okay? Because, of course, that bind has to be right beside the patient. Okay, so here's my string array of selected options. Okay, now, inside the try block, we need to add the selected conditions. Now, we can do this directly. We aren't actually going to call that method. We could, but it's so straightforward because there's obviously in a create, nothing is there. So we don't have to worry about removing anything. All we need to do really is just add, okay? So even before the if for the model state, I'm going to add the selected options. I'm doing it before we check for model state because remember, if it's not valid, we're going to skip over all this and just return it to the screen. So I need to make sure that I've captured which checkboxes were checked. So when I redisplay on the screen, it'll show up again with the same checkboxes selected, right? So if my selected options isn't null, then I just use a for each loop here, go through and basically add all the conditions to it that I need, and away we go. So they'll all be added to the patient condition collection, right? Before we go on and even check for validity. Now, one of the things that we're introducing here for the first time are complex objects that contain many other objects. So when you think about save changes, right? Our patient now contains all these other things, okay? The patient conditions collection and so on and so forth. When we save changes, how is it going to go about doing that? Think back for a moment to your database course, right? You learned to create a transaction where you would maybe create a parent record and then go on and create related child records, or even update a parent record and then update related child records. And you wrap the whole thing inside of a transaction. So if any part of it failed, the whole thing would roll back, right? Well, guess what? That is exactly what Entity Framework Core is going to do for us. With a complex object that already contains collections inside it, when we go to save the data, all we do is context add patient. The fact that it's included all this other stuff, no big deal. It will just create whatever transactions it needs inside the database, right, to actually finish the operation of saving all the changes in all the related objects, right? So, wow. Think about that for a minute. How much work you had to do in order to do that when you were writing the code yourself, and this is going to do it for us. But it does introduce something in addition, another type of exception. Basically, it's a transaction in the database, so it will attempt to do it. What if it rolls back? Well, it'll try again. Maybe it's because some record was locked due to some other activity in the database, right? This is general for all different types of databases, okay? There's usually a retry limit. In many cases, it's 5. It'll try to complete a transaction up to 5 times. After that, it gives up. And then it will raise this exception, a retry limit exceeded exception, right? So we have to add to the model state an error saying, unable to save changes after multiple attempts. Try again if the problem persists. You know, see your system administrator or whatever, right? And notice this will be in the summary at the very top, right? That's why we have an empty string here. Okay. All right. But before we return the view, remember we talked about the fact that we want the same checkboxes to appear, right? Well, we have to add one line of code. Just like we populate our drop-down list, so the correct option is there and pre-selected in our drop-down list, we want to populate assigned condition data for our patient as well. And that's it. So the create process should be ready to go. Might as well finish the edit, right? And then we'll test the whole thing. So coming into the edit get, okay? Now you see we were still using the nice, very efficient find async. But remember, we talked about this. You can't use any .include with find async. So we're going to have to replace this query here with one that allows us to have our includes, right? Because we need to include the patient conditions and the condition. Notice we don't have to worry about including the doctor or the medical trial, because those are lookups, right? They're in select lists. But we do have to include the medical history here, right? Because it has to be part of the object itself. Okay. And the only other change in the get, once more, we're going to actually call our populate assigned condition data so that all the checkboxes are ready to appear, and all the ones currently in, okay, the medical history as shown through this will actually already be checked. Okay. Now, to the edit post, once more, we have to add our selected options parameter, our string array. Okay. And again, we can use first or default, right? But we need our dot includes here as well. Include patient conditions and include condition first or default. Okay. All right. Now, before we actually get to the if where we try update model, right? We have to update the medical history here. This is also so, right? So that if we need to redisplay because of some error or whatever reason, right? We've already updated the patient to update. And then it will be ready to redisplay with the proper checkboxes already selected. And that happens first before we do our try update model. Now again, because of the transaction, we need to add our catch for the new retry limit exception. So I'll put that before the DB update exception, right? Okay. And then finally, before returning the view, once more, we'll populate assigned condition data to get those view models in place so we can display the proper checkboxes on the view itself. The only thing left is what to put on the actual view, right? We're almost done. So let's come to the two views involved. So again, going to views, patient, it's the edit and create view. I need to modify. So where do I want to put this? Well, I don't know. Maybe I'll put it, I'm going to put it above the two foreign keys here. All right, so I'll put it after coverage, although I guess coverage is almost like a foreign key. Yeah, maybe I'll put it right after the email. There's no right or wrong. It's just where you're going to decide to put it. So let me get the whole div from my copy paste file, and we will put it in place. Okay, so it's a form group. Okay, we have a label up top, display name for our patient conditions, which will just say history, right? And then here we are. So we go into we make a little table to store it all, right? And I'm just going to have a 2-column table of checkboxes. You can change that depending on what looks best in the user interface that you actually build, okay? So I have from my view bag, my condition options, okay, will be a list of my check option view model objects. Notice we have to fully qualify the namespace because we're working inside the view. And that is my checkboxes, right? Then for each checkbox in checkboxes, okay, but this is just using modulus, so I get 2 columns of checkboxes. That's all that's doing. We basically make a new row after 2 checkboxes and keep on going, right? So for each one, we have a table data tag pair. We have input type as checkbox. Notice we have the common name. Every checkbox has the same name, selected options, which of course, you remember, corresponds to the parameter we added up here, right? That's how it gets the value, okay? So selected options, right? Value will be the ID of the particular, and that's coming from our view model object, the ID of the condition, okay? And we have to be careful to use HTML raw so that we can include checked equals checked if the assigned Boolean value is true, right? Then beside the checkbox, we'll just add the display text, a couple of spaces, and away we go. So that'll be like a label sitting beside the checkbox itself. Now I'm going to put the exact same code. I'll put it in the same place on the edit page. So right above coverage. Okay. All right. We're ready to give it a try. Drum roll. And up it comes. Which monitor will it come on? Let me see. Oh, yep, came on the other one. No problem. So if I come to patients, so there we see Fred has these two in his history. If I click edit, look at, there are my checkboxes for the two that he has. I can say, no, he's also had measles, right? But you know what? He hasn't had cancer, at least not yet, thank goodness. So I can take cancer off. I'll add measles, but he has also had mumps, right? I'll click save, and there we go. Cardiac, measles, mumps. It successfully saved my changes. If I go into Wilma, she has diabetes checked off. Let's remove it. So now there's nothing checked. And there we go. Nothing listed for Wilma. In a create, we have the same checkboxes, but of course it comes up with nothing here, right? Test it yourself. I'm not going to take time while recording the video to show you that it does work exactly the same way. Success. So now we can see all the details, right? We can edit, we can create our many-to-many relationship. Oh, we are on a roll.